So we are absolutely delighted to have Eleonore with us today to talk to us. We have been really looking forward to this. I know so many had asked for this talk, so I don't think you need much of an introduction, but just a big thank you for agreeing to speak with us today. And I will hand over to you, and we'll have 20 to 30 minutes of talking and then lots of room for question and answer afterwards.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. Let me just share my screen. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Yes. So hi, everyone. It's really my pleasure to be here and to be able to contribute to such an interesting project. So I'll introduce myself. I'm head of Anticipatory Action and Innovation Research at UNU Center for Policy Research. For those of you that don't know, UNU is a distributed university within the UN system. We have 14 offices in different countries, and generally the offices are distributed along kind of departmental lines. So you have an area, a thematic area of focus for each office. So for example, in Macau, we have a focus on technology. In Canada, we have a focus on water and so on. And the Center for Policy Research is based in New York and Geneva and aims at translating the research into the UN system. So my talk today is about AI governance more broadly, and I do want to give it a little bit of an angle or orientation on collective intelligence, which I know is an area of mutual interest with your research initiative, and also something that I've been researching for a really long time. I was first interested in deliberation during my master's thesis in 2010, and have continued to work on this thematic in parallel to the artificial intelligence governance research. And especially with the advent of generative AI and a lot of advances in the field of deliberative AI and convergences between collective intelligence instantiations and artificial intelligence, I'm finding it now kind of converging into one stream, and I'm really excited to be able to talk about it as a joint initiative. So how to frame this idea of artificial intelligence and collective intelligence. So collective intelligence first is a shared or group knowledge that emerges from collaboration, deliberation, discussion, collective efforts, and sometimes competition. Of course, on the online space, one of the big known examples of collective intelligence is Wikipedia. And I actually participated in Wikipedia Day in January at Columbia University here in New York. And the Wikipedia community really believes in this idea of collective intelligence and the idea that a joint knowledge or repository has been created by an open group of individuals all around the world. And there's been thousands, if not millions, of collaborators putting together this knowledge repository that we all know quite well at this stage after 20 years. For me, deliberation is actually the process of generating collective intelligence or a shared decision. So we know of deliberation as a process that can take place in the judicial system, particularly in the United States where they have juries. I'm Canadian, and so the system is a little bit different in Canada. The process of deliberation is also something that takes place in parliaments in order to come up with decisions on laws. There's also deliberation between citizens and their representatives, which I'm particularly interested in. So how do citizens participate in political processes or democratic processes outside of elections and provide their inputs into what decisions should be made by their representatives? And for me, the connection between the two is a process where collective intelligence can be seen more as an output, as one of the outputs of deliberation. when we look at artificial intelligence, there's a wide range of ways of understanding it. So I won't repeat the kind of broad OECD definition that we often use in AI policies, which is about tools that are developed with a predictive element, but rather to think about the types of technologies, the intent and the purpose of AI. A lot of the talk I'm going to give today is going to be connected to generative AI, but of course AI is a huge umbrella term for many different types of technologies that have underlying similarities, but in fact are quite different. And that includes machine learning, examples of predictive analytics, which I've worked on a lot as a data scientist. It includes computer vision, which is connected to robotics and so on. There's also an element of intent. So how do we use these types of artificial intelligence tools? And so in AI governance, we've often talked about the distinction between foundational and specific use AI, where foundational is more akin to the types of tools that are broadly available, such as our new generative AI tools that have so many different applications. Really, the sky's the limit. There's many other types of AI that are very specific. For example, an AI algorithm that is used to sort through resumes and come up with a long list when you apply for a position, something that I'll talk about a little bit more later. An AI tool that is used to identify manufacturing errors in a parts processing or parts creation plant, and so on. There's also a distinction between using AI for commercial use and using it for research. And finally, we have the many, many applications and purposes of AI. So in this talk, I'm going to talk a lot about three types of artificial intelligence. AI used to create content, so text, images, videos, code, audio, so on. AI used to monitor content, so flag different examples or instances, for example, of hate speech or of disinformation. AI used to recommend content, so how to disseminate information using AI, how to recognize user profiles online and serve people content, whether it's video, whether it's social media, that they will be interested in clicking on. So why do I think that collective intelligence themes and artificial intelligence are connected? So this diagram, I first drew a version of this in my master's, so it's been over 10 years. And the idea is that, in fact, when you look at the process of artificial intelligence, we've often thought that the objective of a lot of the research in AI is to create kind of like a duplicate of a human being. So think about a cognitive process of an individual human being. Think about duplicating individual tasks. But what's been really interesting with the generative AI advances and the way in which a lot of AI is being developed, trained on large data sets and arriving at kind of convergences and averages and so on in their outputs, is that actually it's less about mimicking individual intelligence, but more about duplicating collective intelligence. So in the first part of the diagram, you can see how a collective intelligence deliberative process might work, in the sense that you typically have multiple participants. It can be 3, it can be thousands, it can be millions, which will be engaged in some form of discussion. Historically or traditionally, it's been in person synchronous discussions, for example, in town halls, in parliaments, and so on. Now we have a lot more asynchronous and online virtual discussion processes where a lot of people have various inputs, enter into a discussion, potentially have reshaped ideas, and emerge a consensus or a series of different outputs. With artificial intelligence, we see a very similar process where training data comes in, it converges and is melded together in a model training process, and then an output is created. So what are the risks of AI, and how does this relate to collective intelligence? So there are many risks of AI, and I'm sure because it's so present in our day-to-day speech and discussions, I'm sure you've seen many or known many of the AI risks. So this list is not totally comprehensive. There's many more risks of AI, but these are the ones that we focus on a lot in global governance. So on the bias and error side, you have more technical risks that are risks to human rights that can be addressed by better understanding and better examining, particularly the training data set. So you have discrimination, which is one, and stereotyping. Discrimination when the output of the AI tool is different for a certain group of people or for even an individual in a way that is harmful to them. And stereotyping when the output of an AI tool propagates values and norms related to a certain group of people in a way that makes them inferior to another group of people. So we often speak about, for example, gender stereotyping or racial stereotyping, and how those inferiority stereotypes are propagated through generative AI tools and through other kinds of tools as well. Then we have the section of misuse. So the propagation, the use of AI, even if there's no biases and errors, even if the tool is developed very well, the tool can be reappropriated for issues such as disinformation, which is the creation and the sharing of false information with an intent to harm, which is different from misinformation, which is the unintentional sharing of false information, typically, in brief. AI is also often can be reappropriated for conflict purposes. And then we move on to kind of broader and broader issues. So cybersecurity, which is a lot of the issues with AI and cybersecurity are also linked to just general digitization of society and risks such as data loss and privacy, which are increasing whether or not we use AI. But AI tools do have specific vulnerabilities, and we see that in the possibility of manipulating training data sets or manipulating models and algorithms themselves. We have also broader societal values and objectives, for example, exclusion, inequality, and threats to our global goals, which is something that we're very concerned when looking at global governance of AI. And finally, I'll add the last one. I personally don't adhere to research on this, maybe because it's very difficult to do, but there's been a lot of conversation, particularly with heads of AI companies, about imminent societal collapse related to artificial intelligence, and so I included it in my slide. I can't tell the future, so I actually have no idea if this will happen or not. But I do find it very hard to measure and to research something so kind of vague and broad and diffuse as that. And I tend to want to go more towards the biases and errors and even some of the specific threats to societal values than these broad kind of vague threats that are difficult to pinpoint exactly. So in relation to what we're interested, we are interested in three types of risks in particular: discrimination, stereotyping, and disinformation. So I'll give some examples of each. So discrimination, for example, I brought up the example of AI being used for human resources. And so many people have heard of this example because it came out in 2018, which is quite a while ago at this stage. Where Amazon was using an AI algorithm that discriminated against female applicants for its technical recruitment process. And the way in which it did that is that it had kind of text vectorization process to just analyze text in resumes, and it had somehow inadvertently pulled out certain terms that were only associated with female CVs, namely the term feminine, or female, which you would have in your CV if, for example, you are the captain of the female rugby team in your university. And also if the applicants had gone to all-female colleges. So in the United States, there's colleges such as Barnard that are associated to Columbia that traditionally have been colleges for women, and that continue to be kind of largely female colleges. And so those terms in somebody's resume would have removed them from the long list of applicants. And so this was quite shocking. And there's many more examples of this, whether it's in HR, whether it's in financial loan applications, and so on. One of the huge challenges of this is that because we still have we're in a very weakly governed space, although this is changing very rapidly. There's a lot of this information about discrimination in AI comes out after the fact through investigative journalism or whistleblowers, and in a non-systematic way. So we actually don't know the extent to which algorithms that we interact with on a day-to-day basis discriminate by groups. We just have a lot of hints that there's many ways in which traditionally marginalized groups of any kind will be discriminated against by AI. For stereotyping, so I think the easiest example is how generative AI tools over the last couple of years have been grappling with the fact that they've been trained on data from the internet. And in this way, they have propagated enormous amounts of gender stereotypes or racial stereotypes or really any kind of stereotype that exists on the internet. And it's been challenging because more and more of information online is being produced by these generative AI tools that may be propagating kind of old norms of gender norms, unacceptable norms in relation to women, for example, such as sexualization and other types of values, which are against human rights. First of all, stereotyping is protection from stereotyping is a human right that's outlined in the Convention on Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, which was signed by many countries in 1977, I believe. So it's a violation of human rights, but there's also a lot of risks to the current advances in gender equality and gender rights that could be threatened by this kind of stereotyping by content creating AI on the internet. And finally, we have disinformation. So we're about to publish a report, I believe today or tomorrow, that looks at the effects of generative AI on disinformation. You don't really need a report though, because most people have tried ChatGPT or tried other generative AI tools and can imagine how you could easily create a disinformation campaign by using that tool. And one of the first things that I did when I tried ChatGPT over a year ago, I guess, or maybe more, when it first came out, was to ask for a campaign, a series of 1 million tweets that all had hashtags and that spread some kind of false fake news. So I think I had asked something very silly, which was to write 1 million tweets about how flies have no wings. The first thing that popped into my head as something very silly, example of disinformation, I guess, or intentional false news. I don't know if it's really harmful. And then I got 1 million tweets. They were all different, and they all had interconnected hashtags, meaning that there was only 4 or 5 hashtags in the whole set, and they were connected to each other. So I could have that information and share it online through a bot, for example, or send it to my network of influencers as disinformation campaign manager. And I thought that was quite striking. And so it's hard to find evidence of this online because it is increasingly difficult to know if content has been created by AI, generated by AI, or generated by humans. but it has certainly been a concern. And so we've been doing research in particular on disinformation campaigns and conflict in sub-Saharan Africa to see how generative AI might be used to foster this type of disinformation. So how is AI related to disinformation in particular? So you have three ways. You have AI used to generate disinformation, which I've just mentioned. You have AI used to disseminate disinformation, which is through recommendation systems in particular, which are used on social media and which predate the advances on generative AI. Of course, we've been subjected to recommendation systems for the last 2 decades. And AI used to fight disinformation because, of course, there's such a volume of disinformation online that you need artificial intelligence tools at this point to support in the monitoring of either hate speech, of false news, false information, of conflict enhancing content, and so on. What's really interesting here is that there's actually a lot of analog non-AI initiatives to fight disinformation. And it's really, really impressive. So journalistic fact-checking organizations that operate like civil society, like nonprofits, have been operating and working quite hard on this disinformation case around the world. And what they do is they do a traditional journalistic fact-checking method where they look at each element of information that's coming out and they research it and they publish kind of counter narrative and explain why this information is false. And it does seem like a kind of a losing battle, but at the same time, I think part of the challenge is more that these initiatives are underfunded and maybe not supported well internationally than the fact that they are using analog methods. I think it's quite interesting not to just use AI against AI in a kind of mounting duel, but also to try to think about traditional methods that could be really used in this domain. So just something to think about. So how do these link with collective intelligence more broadly? So as I mentioned, discriminatory AI can affect people's socioeconomic status, weaken their voice in the collective intelligence space. So if you have tools that systematically discriminate in hiring and in giving of loans and in other areas, they will increase the marginalization of certain groups. So if you imagine that you're part of those groups and you've been applying for jobs online and you don't get a job, your economic status becomes more vulnerable. You have less access to online forums or public forums. Your participation in society is weakened, and so that's how we have a risk of dimming marginalized groups' voices in the collective intelligence space. And when I mean marginalized group, I really mean any group that's discriminated against in AI tools. Then we have stereotyping. So stereotyping can embed harmful ideas about certain groups into common knowledge repositories. So one of the conversations that we were having at Wikipedia is if AI starts to be used to generate Wikipedia articles, and that's going to be very difficult to monitor, how can we make sure that harmful stereotypes are not embedded into these repositories? At the moment, if somebody writes something on Wikipedia that is stereotyped, presumably there will be other editors and other contributors that can go and revert that. But there can be a tipping point where the information that we're all subjected to is stereotyped enough that people don't notice if you have biases and if you have stereotyped embedded in a knowledge repository like Wikipedia. And so it's a challenge. And there have been many instances of documented biases on Wikipedia. For example, if you look at certain articles, whether it's history, politics, culture, and so on, if you look at them in different languages, you certainly see the cultural biases and differences in values in the way in which these are written. So the same can be said of particular norms in our society. And finally, we have disinformation. So disinformation pollutes the various perspectives presented during deliberation, and it can lead to errors or biases. So if we have enough information, again, similarly to stereotyping, that has been intentionally placed to skew people's views on certain issues, that can lead to a lot of bias. At the UN, there's been a big concern on disinformation campaigns being led against peacekeeping missions and humanitarian interventions, simply linking these interventions, for example, to illegal natural resource extraction, which has been a very interesting case that happens a lot in DRC, for example, where interventions that are aimed at maintaining peace or keeping the peace or distributing humanitarian aid are linked to stealing gold, for example. And there's a lot of examples of content being disseminated in that with the objective of pushing out the interventions or diverting the humanitarian aid in particular to a certain area. So this is an example of how disinformation can be used. So there's many opportunities of AI for collective intelligence. I've touched on Wikipedia, and I think one of the elements I'll mention here in particular is that the community at Wikipedia is interested in using AI to generate little stubs of articles for themes that they haven't covered yet, so that the community can then go in and edit it and expand it. So not necessarily to use AI to generate a whole article, but generate a few sentences to just kind of start on themes that haven't been present at Wikipedia. And so this is something that they're debating internally. Another example is the example of deliberative AI. So this is a photo from a workshop on deliberative AI that we had in 2021. With a lot of collaborators discussing deliberation and how to best construct deliberative platforms in the information space and on the internet. There's also been some pilots with the Department of the DPPA Innovation Cell at the UN, which has deployed tools that aimed at sustaining an online deliberations for people in Yemen and in Syria in an asynchronous way, where there was deliberative tools were used to collect different inputs, allow for perspectives to be collected from individual participants, converge and collate the different perspectives, and try to arrive at different ideas and different convergences in the peace building process. So this is certainly an area in peace building in particular that is of interest. Often what I've seen so far is a lot of pilots and kind of early iterations of this. And certainly there's a lot of potential and also potentially a lot of risks to conducting deliberative AI, but it's certainly a very interesting field. So I'll just close this talk by talking a little bit about the global governance of AI and kind of connecting that to this conversation about AI and collective intelligence. So at the moment, we have three overlapping pathways for regulation. The self-regulation of AI companies in particular, or companies that utilize AI. We have national regulations, which are underway at different speeds in various countries. And we have the global regulatory process, which is the one that I'm most involved with. When you think about self-regulation, there's any company that's been using AI or that's been creating AI has to a certain extent been engaged in self-regulation. And that involves creating internal policies, training staff members. But interestingly enough, more and more any company creating AI is involved in public policy, the shaping of public policy. And so from both a national and a global perspective, what's really novel about AI is that it is a multi-stakeholder initiative, that for better or for worse, the intuition is that AI companies must participate, and civil society organizations must participate in order to get a broader picture of what AI really is and how it can be actually governed because of the complexity of the issue. And so any company usually has at least one person engaged in a kind of public policy dialogue, either participating in standard setting like with the IEEE or ISO, or even delegated to something like the UN's AI advisory body, which has multi-stakeholder participation and has members from Google, from Microsoft, and from OpenAI. We've seen coming up various approaches to national and regional governance of AI. So I've given kind of 3 big examples to show differences also. The European Union approach, which was just adopted in late 2023 and which will be enacted, I think, in 2025, is a centralized approach which was negotiated between EU member states. It's a risk-based approach in that it outlines the applications of AI that are risky, that are considered high risk, and those are the ones that are regulated. So types of high risk applications of AI would be AI used in border control and migration, for example. AI, for example, decision making on visas or even biometric identification. AI used in the judicial process. So similarly, AI used to help in coming up with decisions for criminals or recidivism, etc. There's also AI, public-facing AI that is considered risky, like AI in education, AI in financial services or social services, and so on. If you are a company and you deploy high-risk AI, you must get a certification ahead of time to show that you've done due diligence and audited your systems, that you have a good monitoring system in place to make sure that you are avoiding discrimination and other harms. The US in October published an AI executive order, which was published directly by the president, Joe Biden, and so was not a kind of externally publicly negotiated process, certainly internally negotiated with many stakeholders, including private sector entities and different government departments and members of civil society. It's a decentralized approach in that each department in the United States has different responsibilities. So the Department of Labor will be responsible for the impact of AI on labor, and also for the deployment of labor-related AI, like the human resources example. Department of Education will be responsible for avoiding harms in the use of AI in education, and so on. It's not a regulation like the EU where there will be fines if you don't comply. It's a standards-based and a voluntary regulation where companies will be strongly encouraged to publish the results of their adhesion to national standards. And we have China, which has been publishing over time incremental AI guidelines and regulations, which are also standards-based and that tend to come out on a regular basis every few months. So related, for example, a guidance specifically on generative AI, a guidance specifically on social media, and any other kind of new tool that will come out will probably have a specific guidance. So instead of having a sweeping regulation like the EU that covers all types of AI, other countries like China are doing it one specific application or one kind of sector at a time. And finally, we have global AI regulation. So actually, global AI regulation is a process that has been happening for a while in order to address some of the issues that I've just outlined in the different perspectives and different approaches of different countries, in order also to address things like global inequality and access to the opportunities of AI and overarching protection of human rights for all human beings and not only for certain human beings in certain jurisdictions. And so there's a dual mandate with global governance of ensuring that the human beings around the world are equally protected from the risks of AI, and that countries around the world are equally, or as much as possible, able to benefit from the opportunities of AI. So private sector companies started actually getting together and thinking about agreeing on certain ethics and principles across borders early on in 2017. Having worked as a data scientist during that time, it was very much kind of developer driven or data scientist driven because people such as myself were deploying AI tools without a lot of oversight at the time. And so there was a lot of concern that we would be held accountable if things go wrong. You don't want things to go wrong. You don't want there to be kind of bad negative effects from the AI tools that you're deploying. I was working a lot at the UN on deployment of predictive analytics tools in the humanitarian sector. And so it really required a deep reflection on how this would impact beneficiaries of the tools, what happens if there's an error, what happens if there's discrimination against certain groups in the tools that we're deploying, what other impacts could there be, for example, on privacy and so on. So it started with either private sector, then there were civil society organizations, and then over time, it kind of bubbled up to a more governmental and multilateral process. So in 2021, UNESCO published the recommendation on the ethics of AI, which was adopted by all UNESCO member states at the time. So it's not just a guideline from UNESCO, but it's a international law norm that was published at the time. And so today, the UN in July 2023 launched the AI, or it was launched in September, it was announced in July, launched the AI advisory body. And the aim of this initiative is to bring together 38 experts from around the world, multi-stakeholder experts, which aim to come up with recommendations on a very comprehensive approach to global AI governance led by the UN, such as an agency, a convention, or more likely a whole set of an architecture which contains many different elements and actions, whether it's an observatory on AI, whether it's a set of kind of interconnecting framework convention with the various standards, and so on. There's a lot of initiatives that have already taken place, like the UNESCO recommendations, but many other global governance initiatives which would need to be kind of pulled together into a comprehensive picture. And so the interim report of the body was published at the end of last year, on end of December 2023. At the moment, they're engaging in deep dives, which aim to look at this global AI governance picture from a sectoral perspective, like gender, environment, and so on, and hopefully collective intelligence. That would be quite interesting. And then a final report will be published in June or July of 2024, of which I'm pretty involved with. And this report will then be taken to the Summit of the Future, which is going to be a section of the General Assembly meetings in September, which will focus specifically a lot on technology governance, the Global Digital Compact, and artificial intelligence. So I will stop here, and thank you very much. I'm very happy to use the rest of the time for a conversation.
Huge thank you from the DCitizens team for your talk today. It's been so thought-provoking, and yes, it's just been really wonderful. And thank you to everyone for all the questions. Our next talk is going to be from Dilrukshi Gamaj on the 21st of March, and she's going to speak to us about her perspectives on digital civics from a Southeast Asia context. And otherwise, just big thank you for everyone for coming. A big thank you again to Eleonore for clapping.
Thank you.
Ironically, the AI is not working today to get us to clap. But we thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure.